Joining me now is someone who knows all about how the FBI conducts these kinds of investigations. Chuck Rosenberg. He's a former senior FBI official and a former U.S. attorney, and now an MSNBC contributor. All right. So this Times story indicates a few things we did know, that there was an FBI informant in Stephen Halper, that there was a research assistant. I feel like we've known some of those things. I'll tell you what was the most alarming to me when I read this. When I found out that Halper, before going into a meeting at the White House, being invited to the Trump White House, is letting the FBI know, I've been invited to the White House. If I were the president, I'd be like, oh my God, they were spying on me in the White House. Why shouldn't he feel uncomfortable about that?
Well, you should ask questions, right? I mean, confidential informants are probably one of the riskiest things that law enforcement does in the following sense. You have to control them carefully. You have to monitor them. They have to check in with you. If they're acting at your direction, fine. If they're freelancing, not so fine. I don't know what the circumstances are, and so I think it's appropriate for the Inspector General to figure that out. But I can tell you about the New York Times article if you want to know. Perhaps in the
I do, and I'm curious about it because how complete do you feel like it is?
Well, it tells part of the story, but here's a good analogy. Let's say the DEA is working an important case against a violent and dangerous drug dealer, and they're working it because an informant sort of told them, where to look and who was doing what. The goal for the DEA would be to remove the informant from the equation and put an officer or an agent in that person's place. You have a professional, they can testify in court.
Put this in pop culture terms, like a Donnie Brasco? Or is that a little too aggressive?
It's not good for me because I've never seen it.
Fair enough. A mob informant type of person. He worked for the FBI, but he ingratiated himself.
Right, but you want to get the informant out of the equation, and you want law enforcement to work the case. So in terms of the New York Times reporting, it makes perfect sense to me that the two people who originally had contact with Papadopoulos, the Australian diplomat and the informant, Halper, would be ultimately removed from the equation, and you'd put an investigator, a trained law enforcement official, into the relationship. That's actually the proper thing to do.
Bill Barr keeps calling this spying. He's the Attorney General, so this has now put a law enforcement figure on top of that word. Is there any part of this that you would say is spying?
No, this is a tried and true investigative technique. The FBI doesn't spy. To me, spying means something extra legal, outside of the legal process. What they are doing is running a predicated investigation. Now, they're running it with an informant, which, as I said earlier...
Would they have had to get judicial permission on the informant?
No.
Okay.
But they would have a very rigorous set of internal guidelines with a lot of vetting, careful vetting, to make sure the informant is doing a couple of things: being truthful and following the rules. And that is something that inspectors general look at. They want to make sure that federal law enforcement agencies are properly running their informants. It can be risky, but the notion that you would introduce an officer into the relationship is actually something that should give Mr. Trump comfort. Instead of having an informant work the relationship, you're having a professional work the relationship.
So a lot of this is going to be, when it's predicated, was there probable cause? There's sort of... struck me just today with the Putin phone call. And at the time when the decision was made to open a counterintelligence investigation on the president himself, and I know I'm in a separate aspect of this, do you see an incident like this, the president's calling it a Russian hoax with Putin, who it is a fact that they interfered in the election? Is that something that ends up looking like probable cause to folks that are in counterintelligence?
It's absolutely concerning. I mean, they would need probable cause if they wanted a warrant. But you wouldn't need probable cause necessarily just to open an investigation, to do a preliminary investigation. And by the way, you can use informants to obtain probable cause. So on the surface, I don't see anything improper, but it's always okay. It's always, smart for the Inspector General to make sure that we're playing by the rules.
This Inspector General report, look, the president being so happy about this New York Times article, there's going to be some people who think, oh, is there something being cherry-picked here? You look at this report, do you feel as if it's a fair reading of what's coming?
I look at the New York Times report, and it strikes me as a normal, traditional law enforcement operation. Remember, Russia interfered in the election. The FBI didn't disclose a word of that before the election. right? If they really wanted to get President Trump, as he seems to think they did, wouldn't they have disclosed it before the election?
As the Clinton campaign likes to point out, the FBI talked about one investigation before the election, not his.
But without picking sides.
Right. No, I know, but that's the point.
Right, but so what I see happening is that they introduced a law enforcement officer into the relationship, which actually gives the FBI better control over what's happening. It takes the informant and the diplomat out, and that should give the president some comfort.
I doubt he looks at it as comfort.
I doubt he does, too.
Chuck Rosenberg, I have to leave it there. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.